Blog Talk Radio.
Hello everyone, good morning. This is Laura Smith on Blog Talk Radio. It is Wednesday morning, April the 27th. I'm glad to be here. This is One Child Abuse Survivor to Another. We're on for 30 minutes. It's a live internet streaming radio broadcast from blogtalkradio.com. I'm just putting the chat room open right now and getting into my chat room a little bit late here this morning. But glad to be able to do these shows, just looking at the inner child, and the web page is from Robert Burney, and that's from healing.about.com. And we've sort of been talking about this now for a couple of weeks, and so, week and a half anyway. And it's just good to look at for myself, because this is really kind of an area that I'm sort of still looking into and checking out and trying to get, in touch with what I feel is my inner child, from the past. And so, my good friend Gypsy Witch here this morning. Good morning, or I should say good night to you. And it's good to be here, but you have to listen at your own discretion. I'm talking about abuse, and abuse is a sensitive subject. I'm not a counselor, I'm not a therapist, I'm just a private citizen paying to do my own shows, and I say this on every show because just in case somebody's listening for the first time. And, you have to listen at your own discretion, because the topics of abuse can be very sensitive for a lot of people, and especially if you haven't heard a whole lot about it, or maybe you haven't really done a whole lot of work in your own healing journey and you're just starting out, and things can be a little emotional or quite emotional. So you have to know what's good for you to listen to. And so, I would just say if any topics about abuse actually make you uncomfortable, then you definitely don't want to listen to this show, right? So you have to know, that's what we're talking about: abuse, mainly child abuse, and adult survivor issues, right? So it is sensitive material. So listen at your own discretion. And young people under the age of 18, I ask that you have permission to listen to my shows. Ultimately, I'm all about stopping child abuse, but there's a lot of adult content on my shows, and I think that young people should be protected at all times. And so, maybe have somebody who's older, an adult, or somebody who who's older, who can help you make a decision whether you should be listening, because I don't know how young the people are who are listening to my shows, right? So that's what I ask. So thanks everybody for being here, and we'll get right back into this topic here. This is some interesting information here from Robert Burney. He's written a book, and I'll give you his information again. He's a therapist, and he's like a spiritual counselor, and he's an author, and he's written some books, and he's got a book, and it's called, let me get that for you, Co-Dependence, The Dance of Wounded Souls, by Robert Burney, Burney. And this website is it's the site of Robert Burney and Joy to You and Me Enterprises. And so he says Robert Burney is a codependency therapist, spiritual teacher, and the author of the joyously inspirational book Co-Dependence, The Dance of Wounded Souls. And this is from http://healing.about.com. And this particular link is so long, and I haven't shortened it or anything, through one of those little programs that you could shorten the links through, that I can't even read this link out because it's so long. But I'm going to pop it in the chat room, and you can take a look for yourself. This is quite interesting information about inner child and codependency and whatnot. Very interesting for me because I, recognize a lot of the codependency stuff out there. I kind of relate to a lot of it within my own upbringing, within my own family. And so I'm always kind of looking into this stuff, right? So it's just to sort of recognize my own behaviors and take a look at what's going on and what happened in my life and how I can sort of change this stuff around. So that's sort of what I'm looking at. But yesterday, we were just reading through this webpage, and there's some good information here. This is sort of the beginning of what he's written here about inner child work. And this is actually called, the particular page, Inner Child Healing, How to Begin. And so we were just kind of reading through this stuff. And he said the way that one begins inner child healing is simply to become aware. He says, to become aware that the governing principle in life is cause and effect, to become aware that our relationship with ourselves is dysfunctional, to become aware that we have a power to change our relationship with ourselves. We have the power to change our relationship with ourselves. To become aware that we were programmed with false beliefs about the purpose and nature of life in early childhood, and that we can change that programming. To become aware that we have emotional wounds from childhood that it is possible to get in touch with and heal enough to stop them from dictating how we live our life today. And he says, this is the purpose of inner child healing, to stop letting our experiences of the past dictate how we respond to life today. It cannot be done without revisiting our childhood. So I think that's interesting, and I think that's exactly what it is. You know what I mean? That's where, 4 years ago when I started my healing journey, this is what I was talking about yesterday, really, and the day before, and last week, was that, my whole childhood, really, and all this horrible mass of stuff that I had witnessed and been a part of, and been forced to endure, like anybody else out there who's been abused as a child. I was letting really letting that run my life, letting that dictate my life. And 4 years ago is when I actually said, why do I have to do that? I actually started to ask the question. And I think that's my point where I began my healing journey, was 4 years ago, exactly, almost to the day, really, somewhere right around this time exactly. So it's just because I started to question it. I said, why do I have to suffer for the rest of my life? Why do I have to continue on living this way for the rest of my life? Is there not something I can, I started to really question the whole myself and what I was doing, and motivation, like what was motivating me to live my life this way. And just being depressed and down and having suicidal thoughts and everything. It was just horrible. So wanting to self-injure. And it was just because I was in so much pain from my childhood. I really had not allowed myself to walk through it and to deal with it. It's not that I didn't remember it, because I used to have flashbacks and still do. It's not that I didn't remember what happened. It's the fact that I knew what happened and I was so down about it. And I thought, how am I going to get help, And so, yeah, it took me to the age of 41 to finally make a decision to say, I don't have to spend the rest of my life like that. I don't have to spend the rest of my life allowing this to destroy me, this past of mine, which is what was happening. Because that's what happened to my family. They let this mess dictate and destroy their lives, right? And so I was just headed on the same road, and I recognized it, which is great, because a lot of times I think, it's sad that we don't recognize these things. I wish I would have recognized this 20, 30 years ago. Well, okay, not 30, because I was still in the middle of the abuse, but let's just say even, 15, 20 years ago. I would have been happy to, 25, 30 years old, to have recognized this. I would have been a whole lot further along than I am now. But at least I recognized it, so, even at the age of 41, I mean, it's great, because this last 4 years has been so much better compared to the previous 4 years before I started my healing journey. So, that's a thing. We can't let our past destroy us, and that's what I'm always talking about on my show, because I witnessed it and I was doing this. You know what I mean? So I totally recognize this in myself and in other people. So he says, he goes on to talk about we have to really get in touch with ourselves and be almost like a detective. So he says, so we need to start observing ourselves from at least a more neutral perspective, become a scientific observer, a detective, the Sherlock Holmes of your own inner process, as it were. And he says we need to start being that detective, observing ourselves, asking ourselves where that reaction, thought, feeling is coming from. Says, for instance, why am I feeling this way? What does this remind me of from my past? How old do I feel right now? How old did I act when that happened? These types of things, and that's how we can get in touch with what we were feeling, what we were going through, how it made us feel, and then take a look at I want to say the dysfunction. You know what I mean? Like those things that were put on us. That was never supposed to happen. You know what I mean? Really, abuse is just absolutely so incredibly wrong for anybody to treat anybody like that, especially as a child, because children are totally vulnerable, and they're trying to make sense of their world. And when people when you're growing up, I grew up in a completely dysfunctional, evil home, right? I mean, it's really quite evil. I mean, I throw that in there because I want people to know, and trying to then as an adult live a healthy, normal life, I have to go back and get in touch with all of that programming that I kind of was programmed to think and feel and behave and act a certain way. And so I had to go back and take a look at that and say, wow, this is kind of why I'm doing this, or this is why I feel this way, and sort of almost undo all that stuff, right? All that bad programming and bad behavioral stuff that I picked up from my parents and from my siblings and people around me, right? So then I have to get in touch with the feelings I had about it and allow myself to heal from that. And I think this is what, really what the process is. As far as I know, I'm not a counselor or a therapist, you know what I mean? But I'm just kind of going with what I see out here and what I've heard from other survivors and even what I'm going through right now. So it says one of the amazing things about this process is that as one starts to become more aware of our own reactions, we also start to become more aware of others. We start seeing when the people in our lives are reacting like a little kid or adolescent or teenager or whatever. He says the more we become aware of their reactions, the easier it becomes to stop taking their behavior personally, which then makes it easier to detach from our own reactions and observe ourselves. So I guess just by taking a look, a third-party look, almost like a detective, like he's saying, and looking at other people's behaviors, we can see that a lot of that stuff is just stemming from the same thing, dysfunctional, bad programming, people taking their garbage out on people, and then you start to realize, hey, I don't have to take this personally. This is their problem, not mine. And as a child, when you're being abused, and your parents or whoever it is, it doesn't matter, whoever the abuser is forcing you to put up with their stuff. But as an adult, most of us have the capability to recognize people's behaviors. And as a child, you can't help but take that seriously. It just, they're putting that on you. And as a child, you're believing what, excuse me, you don't have the skills to weed out that stuff when you're little. When somebody tells you something or does something to you when you're a child, you just take it as face value. You don't have the thinking capacity at that age to, as a small child especially, to recognize that is completely false. It's incredibly wrong, and it really has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with the abuser, who's just choosing to do that or behave that way or do whatever they're doing. And so, later on as an adult, we can recognize this stuff, and that's why, honestly, that's why I had to cut my family off, because I refused to be part of their dysfunction anymore. And because I'm on my healing journey, this is exactly what this is. You know what I mean? Like, I'm able to see their behavior now because I recognize that it's very dysfunctional. It's completely unhealthy. You know what I mean? And yet, this is how we lived our lives forever. So there's a couple people left in my family. That's about it out of this huge family. We're almost all gone now. But there's a few left, and I kind of cut them off, because I recognize their behaviors. It's what I was doing before, too, right? We were all doing the same thing. We were all programmed a certain way by our parents, so we just were brought up to believe and think and feel a certain way. So my family, my immediate family, is not on my healing journey with me. Obviously, they're just still doing the same old thing. And I recognize that dysfunction, that codependency, that the abusive kind of passive-aggressive stuff, you know what I mean? Like, my family would not, physically abuse me now. I'm, 41 or 45. I can protect myself, you know what I mean? I'm just talking, the psychological abuse is still there. The emotional abuse is still there. And even, I wouldn't even say the verbal abuse because my mother's passed on. My mother was my main abuser as far as that went, physical, verbal, emotional, psychological. But the rest of my siblings that are left and my dad, who's almost 90, are still so toxic, And I'm like, I can see their behavior, and I'm like, look at that. And of course, do I blame them? Not really, because they just haven't seen the light. They don't think they need to heal from that, and they don't think there's anything wrong with their behavior. But it's completely textbook classic psychosis. You know what I mean? Like, a psychiatrist will get a hold of them, and they'd be like, you are codependent, you're this, you're that. You know what I mean? Whatever the diagnosis would be. That's the whole issue. And they would diagnose me too, and they'd say, well, at least you're trying, right? The rest of my siblings and family, obviously, they are in denial. They have no desire to heal, even though they're in pain. My sister drives around the city at night crying because she doesn't want anybody to see her cry, so she gets in her car and drives and cries for days. And this is the kind of stuff. It's depression. It's all kinds of disorder, dysfunctions in our life. My dad was suicidal really throughout his lifetime, and my dad is borderline schizophrenic as well as, who knows, probably borderline personality disorders and everything else. And, depression in there as well. So he's not healthy, and my brother is in complete denial. And he thinks that it's okay that people suffer. He thinks it's all right what my mom did to me and that what my dad did to us, right? And so he's to me, he abused his own son. So to me, I just lump him in there with the abusers. You know what I mean? So he doesn't see anything wrong with his behavior. My parents didn't either. So see, I had to kind of cut them off. I could see their behaviors, and I'm like, man, of course I don't have to take it personally anymore. But it's so toxic, I can't be around it anymore. That's the issue, because I'm on my healing journey. Hanging around with my family for even 2 hours puts me back into that place I was as a child. Angry and full of rage and full of anger, full of confusion, not understanding what their problem is, and why they believe the way they do. And that's really because I've been on my healing journey for 4 years. Before that, I was just going along with it because I was in the mess with them, right? So this is the thing. It's quite interesting to see what happens when you actually start your healing journey. Now, I just cut my family off because they're not supportive to me anyway. I was talking about that the other day. Like if I pass away and kick off from this earth, which one day I will, my family would not be there to, they wouldn't even hold a funeral for me. They wouldn't care. Right? Like my siblings, two of my siblings had died. They just left their ashes, right? They didn't even. There was nobody cared. You know what I mean? People cried a little bit, and then it was like, oh well. There's no concern while I'm living, even, right? So I could pass away like whatever God, my God really dictates that I'm going to go, which I know He knows all about that. My family would not care. They wouldn't even know, right? They'd just be, and then they'd find out. They'd be like, oh well, no big deal, right? Because they don't love me. They don't care. Like my family is completely dysfunctional. You know what I mean? They have no concern and no care, but for themselves, right? And so I'm not part of that anymore. I'm like, you know what? No, you guys do your own thing. I'm doing mine, and I'm going to heal, and I'm going to have a great life, right? And unfortunately, I wouldn't suggest that for people, right? Because it's not something that everybody needs to do. You know what I mean? I think that for myself, I had to do that, but not everybody. I wouldn't suggest it for. It's not a suggestion that I would suggest for people. I just had to do it because I can't handle their toxicity anymore, not even on a level that I'm at right now, because they dragged me right back down into the mess and the mud with them. And I'm like, I'm not going back there. I am not going to behave badly for them, because those old roles that we used to play, that's the issue. They still expect me to play that role of that abused child that I was so many years ago, taking their garbage, taking whatever my parents dished out, taking whatever my siblings dished out, and not standing up for myself, and not, they just want me to sit there and take it, which I did for years, And now I'm like, no, I don't have to take that anymore. You know what I mean? I really don't. And so they know I'm on my healing journey, and actually, because they're not trying to heal themselves, it's not that they're offended by what I'm doing. They just don't care. It's like, whatever, you just, So it's not, they're not supportive. So it's the way it goes. But I have a lot of friends, and that's the thing. I have so many friends who have been with me really through this whole journey, and I have other friends as well. So it's not like I'm alone or anything. But it's hard when your own family. And many times, if you grow up in an abusive environment or abusive home, it's not like many of our families would be supportive, right? That's the issue. And so we do have to look for that support and that help where we can get it. And so I started to reach outward, away from my family, to other people, to survivors, to other people, for that support. And sure enough, those people are there for me. So that's just the thing, right? My own family's not there for me, but my friends are. So that makes a big difference. And I think it's important to find people in your life that can, that can help us, right? So this next portion of this article, he says, is a detective always looks at cause and effect. By becoming a detective, solving the mystery of why we have lived our lives as we have, we can start to free ourselves from our past. And by doing the inner child healing, we can start to learn how to really be alive instead of just surviving and enduring. So this is sort of what I've been doing for the last 4 years, is looking at the cause and effect. Why I behave a certain way, what happened, what was the programming that would cause me to think a certain way, for my belief systems, for my dysfunctional attitudes and ways of thinking. Which would affect even my jobs, affect my personal life, affect relationships with people, right? Excuse me, because I just don't, I just grew up not trusting people, always thinking people had a motive to hurt me, that the underlying motive would have been to that they would get the upper hand. And that's just from growing up and being abused, you know what I mean? My whole entire life, 0 to the age of adulthood, when I could have just left my whole family and took off, even without running away. So we'll say 18 years old. But then I continued to take my parents' dysfunctional, abusive garbage all the way through until my mom passed away. Because I loved her and I really wanted to support her. So, I was trying to gain her love even up until she died, right? But that just wasn't going to happen. And so, this is the thing, right? I spent my whole life hanging around with this stuff. Finally, at the age of 30, I finally ran away, legally ran away at the age of 30. So, and I wasn't necessarily trying to escape the baggage. It's just that I thought that I'd feel freer and, that I could get my life together. And actually, the baggage just followed me right along. You know what I mean? It came with me, and so I had to deal with it. 2,000 miles away from my dysfunctional family, but it was probably for the best because I really needed to get away from their dysfunction and their abuse. You know what I mean? They were still very psychologically, emotionally, verbally abusive, right? They were just too old to beat up on their kids anymore, right? And we were too old. So there you go. But it's sad that people have to deal with this stuff, and so many people do. And that's why I think it's important to make sure you reach out and get help where you can, because we're all different. So whatever works for me, whatever works for might not work for somebody else. What works for somebody else might not work for me. But as long as we try to find out what we really need, whether it's a counselor or a therapist or whether it's more of a group type setting like group support or online group support. But as long as you even if you're going to do self-help, but just make sure that if you can't cope, that you do the right thing by yourself. You know what I mean, and get yourself some help, because it's just so sad to be suffering on your own and just thinking that there is no help. That was my thoughts 4 years ago, because I was just so down in this darkness and this pit of hell, really, until I started my healing journey, which was 4 years ago. But see, most people would have thought I was fine. That's what I was talking about yesterday. From the outside, I look great. Able to hold jobs down, to a certain extent without too many problems, and in a relationship, and doing all right, paying my bills. But inside, I was just so wounded and so raging, so damaged. You know what I mean? And it was until I started my healing journey, I really, had no idea how to get out of this pain. How I didn't realize it was going to have to be me to reach out. So that's why I'm doing these shows. Really, is to encourage people to reach out, right, and not allow yourself to suffer, not allow yourself to destroy your life because of the past. So this is what he's talking about here, not allowing the abuse to destroy us and or whatever it was in your life that caused you to feel that, so whether it's low self-esteem or whatever it caused you to feel that life is not worth it, and that, or that that we're not worth it. We can't let that destroy us. We really need to find out what caused it, and and learn to heal from it and get help if we need to, right? So the next page of this is Inner Child Healing, Why Do It? And if you scroll down there, he says, we are set up to be emotionally dysfunctional by our role models, both parental and societal, and we are taught to repress and distort our own emotional process. We are trained to be emotionally dishonest when we are children. So this emotional repression and dishonesty causes society to be emotionally dysfunctional. Additional urban-based civilization has completely disregarded natural laws and natural cycles, such as the human developmental process. There's no integration into our culture of the natural human developmental process. So it's quite interesting to see what he's got to say. This is from his book. This is like an excerpt from his book. He says, as just one blatant example of this, consider how most so-called primitive or Aboriginal societies react to the onset of puberty. When a girl starts menstruating, ceremonies are held to celebrate her womanhood, to honor her coming into her power, to honor her miraculous gift of being able to conceive. Boys go through the training and initiation rites to help them make a transition from boyhood to manhood. It says, look at what we have in our society, junior high school, about the scared, insecure kids who torture each other out of their confusion and fear and join gangs to try and find their identity. Right? So it is very unhealthy, and it's very sick. This is a very sick society. You bet it is. This lack of integration of the natural human growth process causes trauma. At each stage of the developmental process, we were traumatized because of the emotionally repressive, spiritually hostile environment into which we were born. We went into the next stage incomplete, and then when we're re-traumatized, we're wounded again. So that's from his book, Co-Dependence, The Dance of Wounded Souls by Robert Burney. So it's quite interesting to see his take on things. So he says, for all the so-called progress of our modern societies, we still are far behind most Aboriginal cultures in terms of respect for individual rights and dignity in some kind of balance with the good of the whole. So he says, I'm speaking here of tribal or Aboriginal societies, not urbanized ones. He says, nowhere is more evident in terms of our relationship to our children. Modern civilizations, both Eastern and Western, are no more than a generation or two removed from the belief that children were property. And this, of course, goes hand in hand with the belief that women were property. And the idea that children have rights, individuality, and dignity is relatively new in modern society. It is. It's only a few years old, actually. The predominant and underlying belief, as it has been manifested in the treatment of children, has been that children are extensions of and tools to be used by their parents. This has only come around since, like, I want to say, well, you know, there was the child rights that were put into place, you know, the Convention on the Rights of the Child and all that. I forget what year it was, 1947 or something. In the 40s or 50s, it really started to kind of come around. Nobody was talking about it. Nobody cared about it. And actually, through the 60s, 70s, 80s, actually, there wasn't a whole lot of work being done. This is very recent that people are starting to stand up and say this is absolutely unacceptable. Children have rights. You know, women have rights. I mean, human beings have rights. Men have rights. You know what I mean? Like, what is going on? So it is kind of relatively new. That's why we have to change the hearts and minds of people to treat their children and their family and their loved ones a whole lot better, you know. So this is a very telling insight into the basic beliefs underlying Western attitudes towards children as shared by inner child pioneer Alice Miller in her book, The Drama of the Gifted Child. She shares how the 19th century German philosophers who laid the groundwork for modern psychology emphasized the importance of stamping out a child's exuberance. In other words, a child's spirit must be crushed in order to control them. So, says children are to be seen and heard, spare the rod and spoil the child. It says it is only in very recent history that our society has even recognized child abuse as a crime instead of an inherent right of the parent. And the concept of healthy parenting as a skill to be learned is very new in society. And that's just the truth of it right there. And that's, you know, that's how so many people raise their children. You got to crush that child. You got to crush that child's spirit, that child's individuality. You know what I mean? And that's what so many parents do. That's what our parents did to us. They killed us. You know what I mean? They killed our very spirits and souls, and then the world says, "Well, what's wrong with you? How come you can't get it together?" And it's like, okay, you try coming out from underneath of that. You know what I mean? Okay, we'll see how far you get. You know what I mean? But there are good parents out there, obviously, because there are some healthy people out there. Thank God. You know, we can see, which is great because we can see the difference. You know what I mean? So it's really something, I tell you, what people do to their children. And many of them do these things without even recognizing it because it's a belief system, it's a pattern of behavior that they were brought up in, and they will not question their behavior. They will not question their belief systems. And that's when you have ignorance, and that's what my parents were. They just did everything because they were just reacting. You know what I mean? They weren't thinking, period. You know what I mean? They were reacting to their own abuse, right? My parents were both abused as children. They were both brought up in the 1920s by abusive people, you know, who not only hurt their own children but hurt other orphans. And, you know, my grandparents were very sick people born around the 1890s, early 1900s. That's my grandparents, right? And there was no education. They were very, very ignorant, and they believed that you should just kill your child. You know what I mean? Children were just workhorses, and that they were just there for you to kick around, and they should just shut up and be quiet. So that's how my parents brought us up, right? In the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and 70s, and 80s, you know, because my parents had a lot of kids, and they abused us all the whole time. So, you know, and then expected us to be all right, you know. It's like, okay. I don't know what they were thinking, but, you know, they obviously weren't thinking. And so many people don't. So if you have children, be very, very careful what you're doing. And think before you speak, and think before you act. And do the right thing. You know what I mean? Do the right thing by your children. Do not hurt your children and crush your children. Children are to be, you know, celebrated. They're not to be crushed, right? So have a great day, everybody. We have about a minute left. Thanks so much for being here. I really appreciate everybody taking the time to be here with me this morning. And I'll be back on, of course, tonight on my show, Child Abuse Prevention and Human Rights Abuse Prevention is Up to Us, as well as Dreamcatchers Talk Radio. And then here on Blog Talk Radio. And then tomorrow morning, we'll just pick up where we left off here. So have a good day. You know, if you have a hard time and you just think, oh, my God, I can't cope, you know, how am I going to do this? You reach out to somebody. And if nobody's around because they're working or whatever, you phone a crisis line because you can remain anonymous and you can get some help. You know what I mean? But you make sure that you do get some help. Do not allow yourself to be destroyed by this abuse, right? We certainly deserve to have a good life and we won't have it if we don't stick around for it. So that's the issue, right? I wish I could have got to my brothers years and years ago. So, take good care of yourselves, and we'll talk to you later. Have a good day.